Welcome to the fourth in our series of webinars that introduce new features in 1.4 and in the interface in particular and help you understand how to build better interfaces. These have been done with Billy Schoenberg. Billy has a long experience with interface building, and he is also responsible for implementing all these features. Today he's going to talk about creating authenticated accounts for models and also data analysis.
Thanks, Kareem. Yeah, so I'm happy to be with you today, and we're going to talk about taking your simulations and putting them online on the Icy Exchange, and being able to track information out of them, capture analytics, how people are doing within your simulation, and controlling who has access to your simulation. So before we get started, I just want to quickly go over GoToWebinar. For those of you who aren't yet familiar with it, there's a little grab tab on the left, which allows you to hide and show the panel. In the audio setup region, you can set up your speakers to make sure you can hear me appropriately. And at the bottom is an area for questions at any time. Please feel free to submit questions. We will be doing a Q&A session during this webinar. Without much ado, let's start with what we're going to cover today. So the first thing I want to talk about is authentication. And we're going to talk about setting up groups of users. You can think of groups kind of like classes or sections. And when we talk about groups, we're also going to talk about facilitators, people who have the ability to see the data that's being generated by all of the users within a particular group. And we're going to talk about how you can add users to a group and add users to your simulation so that they're able to use your simulation or not. From there, we're going to move into data collection, and we're going to talk about page tracking. So being able to keep track of what users viewed what pages and for how long, as well as data collection related to simulation results. So what values were calculated by the model for this person or this group of people if we're talking about a multiplayer simulation. And then finally, we're going to end with a Q&A session. And so the first thing I want to talk about is the Icy Exchange. And so by default, the Icy Exchange allows you to sign up for free and create free accounts and publish free simulations. What we're talking about today goes a little bit further than the free level of the Icy Exchange. This gets into the benefits of what's known as restricted access, which is a publishing option that you can purchase through our store at the link above. And, well, what is restricted access? First, let me start with what it costs. And it costs $50 per model per month for non-educators. There is obviously an educator discount, but I know that it's also on sale for the whole month of December of 2017. So the restricted access level of the Icy Exchange gives you the ability to license your model under any license you choose, in particular, reserving all of the rights, whereas the free version of the Icy Exchange, where you publish your sims for free, requires that you agree to license your content under the Creative Commons license, which allows some sharing of your work, whereas this allows you to keep all of the ownership of your work. Simulation will also not be listed in a public directory if you so choose, meaning you can choose to hide your simulation from the public view. This can be very useful if you want to share your simulation only with a select number of people. It gives you access to our authentication features, those which we'll be talking about over the next 20 or 30 minutes. And then access to data collection features, which we'll be talking about for the rest of the hour that we're here together this afternoon. So let's talk about authentication. What are the authentication features? What exactly are we talking about here? So we're talking about users and groups and facilitators. So users and groups allow you to create classes of students who all have access to your simulation. Facilitators are special users who also have access to your simulations, but facilitators can see the simulation results generated by other users within their group. So let's take the metaphor out of a college university. Let's take like a 101 level course, and let's say you're teaching this 101 level course, and you've got 3 sections. You've got your morning section, your lunch section, and your afternoon section of this course. What you do is you would set up each section as its own group, giving it as a facilitator the TA for that section. That way, your morning TA is able to take a look at all of the results generated by the people, by the students in your morning class. Your lunch TA, teaching assistant, is able to see the results from your lunch class, and your evening TA is able to see the results from the evening class. But you, as the simulation author, can see the results for everybody who's run the simulation. So why would you want to use these authentication features? Because they allow you to control who has access to your simulation and for how long. So you could also imagine another situation where you're a consultant and you want to share the results of your work with your client, but you're sharing, sensitive information. You want to make sure that only your client is able to see the simulation. So you can give your client access to the simulation using our tools and our platform, and only your client will be able to see the work that you've done. It allows you to protect sensitive data that's contained within your simulation. And another benefit is it allows you to identify all of the users who run your simulation. In that way, you can know that this group of people have actually run the simulation out of this larger group that I may have invited to use the simulation. Also, it allows you to organize any collected simulation data. So let's go ahead and let's actually take a look at how we set this all up and how we can use it. So I'm going to go into Stella Architect, and I'm using the latest version of Stella Architect 1.5. These features are usable also from within previous versions of Architect, in particular 1.4, but they're going to look a little bit different. So the first thing I want to do is I want to open up an already existing model. So I'm just going to go navigate to my desktop where I've stored that model. And here we go. And so here in this simulation, I've got, an introductory page and, instructions, and there's a whole simulation flow. But eventually you get to the guts of the simulator where you're making decisions and running and comparing results. And so what I want to do is I want to take this simulation and I want to protect it. I want to make sure that the only people that can view this simulation are people who I explicitly allow to view this simulation. So to do that, I'm going to first configure my publishing options. And hitting that button brings up a dialog which allows me to control many of the options which we'll be talking about today. The first checkbox here is ticked off to require users to authenticate in order to view the interface. The next checkbox has to do with where your model runs. If your model is running on our server-side simulation engine or in browser. This is something that we'll cover in the future. The final set of checkboxes is related to data collection, and we'll cover that later on. So by checking off this box here to require users to authenticate in order to view the interface, I'm telling the Icy Exchange when I go to publish it that I want this simulation to be private, that I only want, specific people to be able to view this interface. So I hit OK, and I go to File, Publish, just as I would in a normal simulation in the Icy Exchange. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in. And it brings me to my list of simulations. And I've got a simulator already set up that I can publish into. So if I hit the Update Interface button, you'll see that I'm able to upload this interface and it publishes successfully. It's warning me that I'm not using data collection, even though it's available to me. Now, this process, when you actually do it in real life, is going to be slightly different. In this case, it's gone so easy because I took the time ahead of time to set up a simulation where I've already purchased data collection and authentication. If you were going to do this yourself, what you would do is you would add a new simulation. You would set up the parameters in here. In fact, I'll actually do it. And you could give it a name, set it all up as you would. You agree to the Creative Commons license and you add the simulation, but you never click the upload button. What this does is it creates a placeholder simulation here, which you can then use as a vessel to purchase the authentication restricted access level for, without actually having any content ever be up in the public domain until you've actually restricted the rights for it. In that sense, once authentication has been purchased for the simulation, you'll be able to upload your interface just like I did. So when I've uploaded an interface into a simulation account, which has authentication and data collection already purchased for it, I can go into the settings. And in the settings, you can control, like you can for every simulation, its name and its URL link and its description and keywords. But now, because it's a simulation I've purchased data collection and authentication for, I can choose whether or not I want to include it in the public directory. But what's really important is I get access to this Manage Authentication button. When I click it, it brings me to this Groups page, which asks me to add groups of users to the simulation. Well, in this case, I don't have any groups. I haven't gone through the process to create them yet. So I need to go ahead and do that. I can do that by either, following any one of the links here on the page, or by hitting the User Groups tab up above. So to create a group, I hit the Create New Group button, and I give it a name, and I'll call this, my webinar class. And I don't need a description for it because I know what it is, but you can enter in a description just so that you can keep them all straight. And I'm going to create the group. Once I've created the group, it brings me to this page, which allows me to manage this user group, or this, amalgamation of users. And I can add users to this group, either one user at a time, or multiple users at a time using a template file. So let's take a look at that template file real quick. And I'll just save that there. And we'll come into my downloads and take a look at it. So inside this template file is 3 columns. Each column contains a required piece of information for a user that you're going to create. The first column is their email. So any user that you're going to create who's going to have access to your simulation needs to have a valid, real email address. The second field is their name. That way, we can identify who they are. And then the third column is their access level. We use the number 1 to represent users and the number 2 to represent facilitators. So if you wanted to, you could fill out this spreadsheet, with a whole bunch of real email addresses and set them all up as users of your simulation and upload this spreadsheet to the Icy Exchange to create all of the users within that spreadsheet. And you would do that using this Browse button right here. But that's not what I want to do right now. I want to show you how you can add individual users one at a time. So I can, for instance, add a user to my simulation by hitting the Add Single User button. And this user already existed in the system. And I was able to add him without any additional effort. But if I take a user like this, who doesn't already exist in the system, when I add them, it's going to prompt me to invite this user to the Icy Exchange. So you get this page when you go to add a user who the Icy Exchange doesn't already know about. So what you need to do is you need to give them a name. So we'll call them, sample user. And then we can type in a message that will appear in an email to them, which will invite them to join the Icy Exchange so that they can view your work. So I could put, hey, check out, my simulation. And now I send the invite off. And you'll see that this user has been added to the group. And so if you wanted to, you could make them a facilitator or anything like that. But when I go and check the email for this user, we'll go through the actual rest of the process for accessing the simulation. So let's go back to my list of sims, And let's go and find the simulation again. And let's go back to the settings and back to manage authentication. And so what I want to do is I want to add this webinar class to the simulation. So what that means is now everybody within the webinar class group will have access to the product development data collection simulation. In this manner, I can reuse groups. I only have to go through the process of creating a group once, and then I can apply that group to multiple simulations, or even models or CLDs that I've uploaded on the Icy Exchange. Of course, this has lots of benefits if you're sharing a serialized set of simulations. So now that I've added the class to the simulation, let's go ahead and let's demonstrate how authentication works. So I'm going to take this simulations link, which I'm going to get to by hitting the view link here. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it using Control-C, and I'm just going to open it up in a regular web browser. You'll see here that it doesn't actually let me go to the simulation because I'm not logged in yet. If I sign in, it will then actually bring me to the simulation. I can then go through and play the game. But what I want to show you now is how we can go through the process of taking a user that we've invited and getting them to use the simulation on the Icy Exchange. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Exchange homepage and I'm going to sign out. And I'm going to do that just because I want to make sure that my browser is free of any cookies related to the Exchange before I go through the process of creating a new user. So if we check out this, user's email box, you'll see that I've got an email that says me, as the author of the simulation, has invited this person to the Icy Exchange. And when I open the email, it says, the message that we typed in. And what it does is it requires you to click on this link in order to finish the sign-up process. This link is unique to each individual user that you create. You can't share this link with anybody else. So when you go to create an account, what it does is it gives the user the ability to change their name to fix any spelling mistakes or things like that, and to update their email address. And it prompts them for a password. And then we agree to the terms of service and create the account. Let's see if the account created appropriately. All right. You would go through that process and you would create the account. I imagine what's happened here is I've done this a couple of times with this user, and we've hit some sort of a problem. But anyway, we can take that other user that I had created and used. Oh man, can I remember his password? Okay. And when he logs in and he goes to his list of simulations, you can see that he's been invited to a simulation that he can then view and run through. And so with this now, we can control who has access to our simulation. And at any point in time, we can revoke access by deleting users from the group or removing groups from our simulation. So let's go back into PowerPoint and let's talk about data collection. So data collection contains the following sets of features. It allows you to get access to simulation data, which is a zip of CSV files, or a bunch of charts which are hosted online, containing data from variables in your model. Included within the data is also page tracking information, which is a bundle of CSV files or a bunch of tables listing out records. Why would you want to use data collection? You can use it to keep track of and measure learning in your participants, so you can see how they did on their first simulation run versus how they did on their last simulation run. You can use it to test how effective your simulation is. Are people spending the right amount of time on the right pages? Are they going through the simulation in the way that you think they are? You can use it to track user results. So you can say, oh, John did this at this day at this time, and then on this day he did that. And it works for both single and multiplayer games. Multiplayer games, of course, are those where many users interact to create a single shared simulation run. And it can be important to be able to identify which users created which runs and to track user improvement in cross runs. So this is very easy to do for users who are logged in. So when you've got data collection enabled, it doesn't necessarily follow that you've got authentication enabled. You may, for instance, have a simulation that anybody on the internet can use, but you're collecting data from it. In that case, it becomes a little bit more difficult to track who created which runs. So when you've got an anonymous user running your simulation, somebody who we don't know their email address for because they aren't a member of the Icy Exchange, we provide two pieces of information. We provide their IP address, which for certain corporate users, or potentially corporate users, may not be enough of an identification because a bunch of users may have the same IP address. And we also provide a unique user identifier, but this unique user identifier is stored in the browser cache as a cookie and can be wiped out when clearing the cache. So using these two pieces of information, it's up to you as a simulation author to be able to determine which anonymous users are actually the same person running the simulation multiple times. Typically, you can rely upon a combination of the IP address and the unique user identifier in order to determine exactly who's who. So let's go ahead and let's see how data collection works. So if we come back to the Icy Exchange, what we can do is we can come back into this Configure Publishing Options dialog, and we can enable data collection. And what this does is that it will enable any results to be collected from the simulation. By default, a list of variables is automatically collected. These are the variables for which users are inputting data in your interface. This way you can reconstitute any runs that they've created by looking at the series of decisions that they've made. If I want to, though, I can add an output variable, for instance, customers, for any of the three products. And now these three variables will also be collected. I then also have the ability to choose whether or not I want to collect page tracking data, data which shows what pages each user viewed and for how long. And in this case, I'm going to choose to enable all of it. I click OK, and I go through the publishing process again. And so here I am, and I'm going to update this interface. And now when we go through, I hit the wrong link there. When we go through this simulation and play it, data will be automatically collected in the background. And it's up to you as a simulation author if you want to notify your users that you're doing this or not. So I can make a decision, run the model, make a different decision, run the model, make another decision, run the model. Okay, great. So if we come back through and we go back to our Exchange homepage, we can come into the Info section and hit the View Data button, which shows up in simulations which are using data collection. And here now you can see that it's collected the data that we've just generated. I've run 4 runs, and it's got 4 runs worth of data. It tells me at what time each run has been created, when it's been last updated, and if it's a full model or not. And so what I can do is I can check off all these runs, and I can generate a report with them. And when I generate the report, it asks me what variables I want to include within the report. So I'm just going to include the 3 customer variables. I can then view the charts, which will show me a web page, which has all the data plotted over time for me for each one of the runs that I've chosen. And from this page, I can also download the report data. The report data is a zip of CSV files, which I'm going to save here. And when I open it up, you can see that inside of this zip file is a CSV file for each variable that I've chosen to include within the report. When I open up the CSV file, you'll see here that I'm presented with a column for each run that has been created. And so what you can do is you can take a look at the data that's being saved. So we know who's created each one of the runs, because this is the email address or the word anonymous user if we don't know who their email address is. It's then got a unique identifier, which because we know who they are, is just their email address. If we didn't know who they were, it would be a long string of letters and numbers. It then shows you the IP address of this user, and then the epoch time for which this run was created. An epoch time is the number of seconds since 1970. So we've got a formula which you can use in Excel to convert this, large number into a date. You can look that up in our documentation. So these 2 epoch times tell us when this run was created and when this run was last modified. This next row here tells us how the model, or in what state the model was when it was run. Was it the full model or a partial model? And you might ask, why would we have that? That's because users might be running this model in storytelling mode without all of the model structure enabled. If that's the case, this row will contain information saying that the model was run in storytelling mode. And then from here, we can actually plot the data. And you can see all the data over time saved, in this case, per DT. If we want to change the amount of data that's saved, we can easily do that. And there are advantages to doing that. So we have this option on the model layer called the save step. And this is important because it allows you to control how much data is being saved in your simulation. So you can see that this simulation runs in steps of 36, which is a lot of data. We're actually running 35 time units times 36 DTs worth of data. If I set the save interval to 1, what that means is it's only going to save data on every whole time unit. That'll cut down the amount of data that we're saving by 36 times, which will make the simulation a lot more responsive and make the data requirements for me as an analyzer of this data a lot lower. I won't be collecting all of this interim in the middle data. I'll just be collecting data for values which are divisible by 1 evenly, so 1, 2, 3. And if, by doing this, we make the simulation a lot better for our users. Okay, so now that we've done that, what I want to do is I want to show you what data that's collected from a multiplayer simulation looks like. And the reason I want to do that is because it looks a little bit different, and there are some wrinkles that I want you to understand. So I'm going to log back into the Icy Exchange. And in here, I've already got this, multiplayer data collection sim, which already has some data saved into it. And so we're going to view this data. And you can see that there were 2 runs created, one by the group of users called John's Game, and the other by the group of users called Billy's Game. So I'm going to choose both of these runs. I'm going to generate a report with them. I'm just going to include all the variables in the report, and I'm just going to immediately download the data. And so when I come here and I unzip it, you'll see that there's an extra file in here. There's this multiplayer team info. And so if we open up one of these data sheets here, you can see the 2 runs. and you can see what team created it. And then it gives you an ID number, a unique ID that represents the group of users who created this run and the values. So what I want to be able to determine here is who are the users who are interacting together to create this run versus this run. So I can take this team 58 and I can look it up in that additional file that was added, this multiplayer team info. When I open this file up, you'll see that it contains a listing of every player who has played this simulation, what team they were on. So John's game is team 58, which contains two players, this guy named John, who, that's his nickname, and me, who's logged in. And you can see an example now of an anonymous user ID. So we can tell by looking at this that John and Jack on, teams 58 and 59 are actually the same person. And we can feel confident in that because their player IDs match and their IP addresses match. And then we can go even further and say that really all four of these people are actually the same exact person because they all have the same IP address. So unless you're in a very special environment, where this user, is behind what's called a NAT, they'll all have different IP addresses. And because they all have the same one, we can be reasonably confident that actually all four of these players are actually the same person interacting with themselves to play this multiplayer game. And this could be interesting for us if we're doing any analysis where we want to make sure that all of the players on our, in our multiplayer game are different. But that's how you can use the multiplayer team info file to determine which players are on which teams and what data each player has created. So at this point, I'd like to pause and ask if there are any questions.
Hey, Billy, we have a question that says, you said this is, I said this is fourth in the series. How would you get access to listen to watch the previous presentations? All of those are posted at icysystems.com under webinars. So they're all available there. We have, let's see, if you go to icysystems.com, there's a resources tab at the top. If you click on that, underneath that, you'll see webinars. I think Billy's going to show you.
Yeah. You come in here to the webinars, and it gives you a full timeline of all of the available free webinars that you can watch.
Thank you. There are, at this point, no other questions. You might want to talk about, oh wait, here we go. Some come in. Can Exchange users choose to run simulations in incognito mode without being recorded?
So incognito mode will not affect the ability to record data. All incognito mode will do is force them to log in again. So incognito mode controls the cookies on the user's machine, but doesn't record doesn't prevent any of the tracking that happens server side. So you can use incognito mode as a simulation developer to actually play a multiplayer game by yourself. So you can pretend to be both players using incognito mode. So you can't use incognito mode to escape collecting of data.
Great, thanks, Billy. There's a question about how do you handle when the model changes between different runs?
Yeah, so if you've uploaded a new model in the middle, so let's say, on day one, you've uploaded the first version of your model and 10 users have run it. And then on day two, you've uploaded a tweaked version of your model and another 10 users have run it. What'll happen is we won't mess with any of the data that's been collected on day one. So it'll be kind of up to you as the simulation author to know any runs that were created on day one were with, the first version of your model, and any runs created on day two were created with the second version of your model. And if your models had totally different variables and totally different, everything, you'd still be able to view the data for both of these, distinct simulations together. It would just be that, all of the runs created on day two wouldn't have any of the information, from day one and vice versa. So in that case, the system is very flexible to changes in model structure over time.
Thank you, Billy. The next question has to do with, it's not directly related to data collection, but it is kind of in a way. Is there a way for a user to leave a run in the middle, perhaps some save operation, and then come back and return to it later to pick up where they left off?
At the moment, no. The only case where that's supported is in multiplayer games. And in a multiplayer game, when everybody in the class, when everybody on the team, the group of people who are creating the run drops, it'll hold that run in memory so that it can be resumed at a later point in time. We don't have that feature set functional yet for single player runs, only for multiplayer runs.
Do we plan to add that? Was the next question.
Yes, that's something that we definitely plan on adding. Will probably come out, would be my guess, in the spring to summer of next year.
Thank you. Some quick questions about the sale. The sale is 20% off for up to a month on the per month things, or if you want to host it yourself on your own server, it's 50% off for a year. Someone asked about how billing is handled. We normally, the way we do for any of our products, I don't know if that answers the question. The next question is, if you change your model, does it have to maintain exactly the same file name in order to avoid being charged for a second model?
No, not at all. The way that we keep track of the charging is through the simulation accounts here on the Icy Exchange. So let me just log in and show you my full list. So as long as you're uploading your interface into the same simulation account here, the same row within this table, from our perspective, it's the same model.
Correct, but from the outside, the link hasn't changed either, right? If they wanted to change the link outside, they could do that through the settings,
Correct.
Perhaps?
Yes. So, if you wanted to, let's say you wanted to do, one sim every month that, you wanted to do data collection for, you could actually use the same simulation account, and every month you would upload a new model, change its name, change its URL, and it would be a whole new sim, but it would have nothing, nothing would change from the billing end of things, only, the content end of things.
Great. The next question is there a way to run experiments using 2 or more user groups, each running a version of the model? I assume a different version of the model.
The way that we would do that is you would create 2 user groups, and what you would do is you would have the users enter an identification number into the simulation as a decision in order to parameterize the model differently for one group versus the other group. That way, all of your users are running the same simulation, and you're only paying for a single simulation link. But you're able to cause the model to be different based upon who that user is. And we've actually done that in the real world. We've had customers doing that, where they assign users to a variety of groups. They have them enter in, a unique number, which parameterizes the model for them appropriately. That number is then saved in the data collection, and then can also be used to link them to, for instance, SurveyMonkey results, along with the user's IP address.
Great. More questions. Can you tell us again how you control other users so they don't modify your settings? I don't think other users can modify your settings, but maybe they mean so they can't access specific models.
So the way that you can get multiple users interacting with your simulation, but only the ones you want, is through the Manage Authentication link that you get in simulations where you've paid for data collection. So if we come into this product development data collection simulation and we go into the settings and we go into Manage Authentication, only the users in the webinar class will be able to access this simulation. Any other user will be rejected. And so we can control which users are able to access the class by editing this user group. And for instance, we can remove this person from being able to access the class, and now they won't be able to see the simulation at all. So that's how we can control who's able to see our simulation and when.
Okay, related to that, another question is if I'm in a large company with tens of thousands of employees and I want to share my model with all the employees, do I just create a huge spreadsheet so they can each have access, perhaps from an internal URL?
Okay, so let me answer the direct question with the short technical answer first, and then let me explain a better solution to that problem. So yes, if you wanted to, you could upload, a spreadsheet containing 10,000 users to this multiple users listing, but that's not really the ideal solution to this problem. And when you were asking the question, I think you were getting towards the correct solution when you were mentioning hosting it on an internal company network. So for a large deployment like that, where you're dealing, with a large corporation or even a mid-sized or small corporation with, very proprietary data, who has strict data governance regulations, they'll tend to want to have the service hosted in-house. And we do offer that ability. And so what you would do is you would purchase an enterprise version of the Icy Exchange, and it would then be hosted on your client's internal network. And it would then be public within that internal network, but would be totally cut off from the internet at large, so that only people within that organization itself would be able to access the work that you've hosted on that Icy Exchange. It would actually be a whole separate Icy Exchange that is specific for that one company's deployment. And in that case, you can then have everybody in that company having accounts on that exchange, on that version of the exchange, where they can upload models and share links and do everything like that. But it's still all private and contained only within that organization.
Thanks, Billy. There are 3 versions of hosting it yourself. The first version you pay per model. So if you just have one model, that's the least expensive way to go. The next version up is Stella Server Unlimited, which does not allow multiplayer or running on your own server, and the final version has everything included, and that's Stella Server Enterprise, which Billy mentioned. The next question is, what steps are required to update simulations as new versions of the software come along?
So it's just as simple as hitting that update interface button anytime you make a change to your interface file within Stella Professional or Stella Architect. If as we update the Icy Exchange, and make improvements and refine it more and more, any content which has already been published will get the benefits of that work.
Thank you, Billy. I have a question about the internal pricing, and normally we generate quotes for this. I do actually have the pricing if you give me a second to bring it up. So hosted internally depends on way you do it. If you buy Stella Server Unlimited or Stella Server Enterprise, the name Unlimited, which is the first entry level, the point of that name is you're not charged per model per month. And of course, you aren't for Enterprise either. You're charged to install and use this this service per year on your own servers. If you want to just host one model, that does actually have a charge per model per month. It is not $50, it's quite a bit more. And forgive me for a second, I'm trying to figure out which one of these it is. Yeah, so the one with 4 stars, $150 per model per month to host it in a minimum of 6 months because there's a tremendous amount of setup involved. There don't seem to be any other questions, Billy. Thank you very much.
Excellent. I hope you all enjoyed today's webinar. If at any time you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to support@iseesystems.com. Thank you.